Hi everyone, a very warm welcome again to Life, Loss and Hope. Thank you for joining us today. Please continue to like, to share and subscribe. And today I'm going to be talking about signs of grieving. Somebody said to me recently, I can't be grieving because I'm not crying. It really started me thinking. If I asked a cross-section of the public what they expected grieving people to be doing, top of their list would probably be crying, looking upset and sad. Understandably, these are the more visible and obvious signs of grief, the ones that are easily recognised by ourselves and other people. And today I want to talk about the less obvious signs of grieving, what to look for, and how to help yourself or another grieving person. Two situations really brought this to my attention recently, from people who have given their permission to share their stories. Firstly, a friend reached out to me to ask what I thought was going on with their partner, who they had noticed was just not themselves. When I asked them to describe what they had observed, they said this, that their partner was extremely tired, irritable, critical of self and others. There was a lack of enthusiasm in life generally, an inability to concentrate, make decisions or finish tasks. A sense that they were absent emotionally, with a sense of dissatisfaction with the world and life, a lack of interest in hobbies, conversation, and that they would withdraw to safe, solitary pursuits, and that they were less affectionate. It was really quite a list of things. Reflecting on all this with my bereavement hat on, I suggested that in fact their partner was obviously grieving. I was aware that they had experienced the loss of a key family member only earlier this year. But their response to this was, I can't be grieving because I'm not crying. Before I experienced loss, I also perceived grief to be that short time after a death where people would cry and look upset, and then as soon as the crying stopped and they stopped talking about it, it must be over and they must be okay because they look okay. The second example is similar and yet very different. A friend's husband had noticed that his wife was again not herself, was low in mood, had no enthusiasm for anything, was very tired, sad, anxious, irritable. She had assumed that she was depressed and just struggling with the demands of life, family, work, and all the challenges, until a light bulb moment when a person close to her suggested that she may well indeed be grieving. When we then met and discussed all that she was feeling and experiencing, it was very clear that in fact she was grieving. Around 6 months before that, there was a major loss that neither her or her husband had recognised as a bereavement, because sadly the family had to rehome their much-loved dog as it had become unsafe around their other dog and their children. Although the dog didn't die and was rehomed, it was still like a death, a massive loss that had not been recognised in its gravity. She'd had the dog since it was a puppy and she loved it dearly. I spoke about ambiguous grief in the last video. Ambiguous grief being a grief that is not recognised, that is judged by society and minimised in its effects, and can leave you feeling guilty and ashamed that you feel so bad after a loss, even telling yourself that you have no right to feel this intensity of upset. Pet loss, death of a very elderly relative, an estranged family member, a miscarriage, divorce, and death of an ex-partner can all be examples where we experience ambiguous loss, where people don't expect you to feel as bad as you do and not to grieve as much. Often in this kind of loss, there's no absolute finality, as I used to witness with families in the brain injury clinic, grieving the loss of the person they once knew and yet were still alive, and they would often say it may be easier to cope with if they had died. Of course, they probably didn't mean that, but they just needed a safe place to express the pain of the ongoing situation. As in the case of rehoming the dog, it did also leave my friend with such an open-ended situation with many unanswered questions. Was the dog happy? Was it settled? Where was it? Was it even still alive? Her grief was a classic example of ambiguous grief that had not been acknowledged, witnessed, and talked through. And now, in doing so, there has been much resolution and healing. With both of these friends, the key to moving forward was the realisation for them and their partners, the realisation that they were in fact grieving. Recognising all the things they were experiencing were part of early grief was hugely reassuring and has allowed them both to understand their behaviour and indeed manage it sensitively. In early grief, our capacity is so depleted that it is difficult to function as you normally do. It's like trying to run on a very low battery. Grief is exhausting physically and mentally because of the demands on your body and mind are so heightened, and it's no wonder that there is an inability to make decisions, concentrate or finish jobs. There's just not enough capacity to function as you usually do, which then can make you feel very frustrated and critical as you struggle to do those things that normally come easily and naturally. Remember that nothing is natural or normal in your world after a major loss. The world can seem like a vulnerable place, leaving you feeling dissatisfied, anxious and unsettled, even questioning everything. Our stability gets rocked in grief, and as C.S. Lewis said, nobody told me that grief feels so like fear. After my brother was killed recently, I can remember being hypercritical of myself and others, feeling angry and just plain dissatisfied with everything and so frustrated with myself. But I had to face into it and explain to those close to me that it was grief and it did pass. So if you're living with someone or have a close family member who you have observed with some of these things that I've talked about, someone perhaps who is not themselves, who is withdrawing, angry or low in mood, just track back and see if there was a loss or a death, even in the last 2 years, as they may well be grieving and need support. Because when we are aware that someone is grieving, there are things that we can do that are very helpful. For instance, grievers need space and time alone, as it helps them to process and just be without any expectation of being jollied up or having to put on a brave face. So if someone retreats to a safe and solitary pursuit, even for long periods of time, try to be comfortable with that. They need that safe sanctuary in the world that can now feel so different. It's tough because we want to take away someone's pain and do things to make them feel better, but nothing you can say or do will make them feel better. Just remember that your presence is enough, and being there in the background is more than enough. Or just sitting with someone is a comfort and an anchor. I guess in short, please give space and wait till they step into that space. Also, minimizing noisy environments can be very helpful as they are extra draining, and quietness can be soothing to a battered, busy mind. So many times bereaved people say to me that they feel suffocated by family and friends, especially in the early months when they are just trying to navigate so much and they want to be alone. Grievers also need to be allowed to talk authentically, to tell and retell the events going through and through what has happened without somebody saying, "You've told me that before." Grievers need to be heard in all their questions and ruminations of the what-ifs and the if-onlys without interruption or trying to answer the questions. Like I've described before, it's like that computer wheel spin. Our minds are just searching for answers that probably will never be fully answered. I believe it's a necessary process, even though some of our grieving thoughts and questions can sound illogical and ridiculous to other people. It's good to remind ourselves that nothing in grief is logical or rational when our emotions are scattered all over the place and we are exhausted. If you are living with someone and they are being critical and irritable as they are grieving, try to lean into grace and not take it personally. It's usually those closest to us that are in the firing line, and they can be the safe targets to be angry with. Remember, they are not angry with you, they're angry because someone they love has died. It's a natural human response also to want to comfort someone physically when they are upset or crying, but it is not often directly in that moment that a hand to hold, a hug or a cuddle is helpful. I know myself, it's the last thing that I want, and it actually stops my cycle of crying before it has come to a natural, exhausted end. I find a hug later, when it all has abated, works for me, and I'm ready to come out of my protective cave. It's something I've become acutely aware of now when I support others, not to break the crying cycle by reaching out. It can feel alien to just sit with someone and to do nothing, but it's a practice that you can become comfortable with over time. Of course, everyone is different, and others may find the opposite more helpful. So you could ask your partner what works best for them. Communicating what you need as you grieve is key and allows somebody to give you the right support that you want. My husband used to feel quite rejected and useless when I pushed him away if I was crying and upset. But what we have learned is that it's my way of dealing with it. Having space allows me to fully express my emotions, and he realizes that it's not personal. It's just my coping strategy. And interestingly enough, his is the opposite to mine, and that's okay as well. These signs of grieving can accompany all types of loss, not just death, the loss of a job, a home, finances, physical health, and wellness, loss of identity in illness and through accidents. Loss of our well self is very difficult, to name but a few, some of which we can explore in later videos. Sadly, we live in a society that doesn't understand or necessarily want to talk about death, dying and grief. And that's why we can all learn what to look for as signs of grieving and feel empowered to support ourselves and our loved ones in the inevitable times of loss and grief that one day we will all have to navigate.